In the spring of 1943, months before the Allied landings in Italy, a little-known debate unfolded quietly inside the newly formed Office of Strategic Services. At a time when the Axis war machine was still operating at full industrial capacity, President Roosevelt's young intelligence agency searched desperately for ways to weaken German production without committing thousands of lives to direct assaults. Few operations were as controversial or as closely guarded as the early forbidden sabotage plans drafted by OSS planners in Cairo, Algiers, and London. These proposals, rarely authorized and often discouraged by senior commanders, reveal a hidden conflict within the Allied ranks, a struggle between strategic caution and bold, unconventional warfare. The first sparks of this tension emerged in North Africa, where OSS teams were absorbing lessons from British SOE veterans. Many of the Americans had been trained in demolition at Camp X in Canada, learning how to operate behind enemy lines using plastic explosives, pencil timers, and improvised fuses. Yet their lack of battlefield experience created hesitancy among military leaders who feared that untested operatives could trigger diplomatic disasters. Several units, such as the OSS Special Operations Branch in Algiers, were eager to prove themselves. But their proposed missions, deep infiltration, industrial sabotage, and covert strikes, were deemed too dangerous or politically explosive for high command. One such plan targeted Axis-controlled shipping lanes running from Greece to Italy. OSS analysts believed that a coordinated attack on coastal fueling depots near Patras could disrupt German troop movements to the Balkans. The idea involved inserting a small team of 4 operatives disguised as local fishermen, who would carry limpet mines hidden within false fuel barrels. U.S. Army commanders in the Mediterranean theater rejected the plan almost immediately. They feared that, if captured, the operatives would be executed as spies and provoke reprisals against civilians. The tension between ambition and restraint began to divide the OSS internally. A field note written by an OSS liaison officer in Algiers, dated June 1943, summarized the frustration. "We are trained for missions we are not allowed to carry out. We prepare, then we wait, and the waiting breeds doubt." While the quote does not specify the mission, the tone reflects the mounting pressure inside the organization. Historians have since noted that these internal conflicts directly shaped the OSS development. On one side were cautious diplomats and military planners worried about unpredictable consequences. On the other were operatives determined to strike wherever the Axis was vulnerable. The most telling example of this divide centered on a proposed infiltration of the Ploiești petroleum complex in Romania, Germany's most important oil supply. Although the U.S. Army Air Forces planned the devastating Operation Tidal Wave bombing raid, the OSS envisioned a complementary ground operation. Using Romanian resistance contacts, they hoped to insert a pair of agents who could sabotage refinery pumps, storage valves, or electrical substations. But the risks were astronomical. German and Romanian security forces maintained constant patrols, and the refinery had already been fortified in anticipation of Allied attacks. According to declassified OSS memoranda, the ground operation was ultimately disallowed due to unacceptable probabilities of compromise and severe collateral consequences. Yet what makes this episode so intriguing is not the cancellation, but what happened after. Archival notes from OSS Station Cairo mention 2 operatives who failed to return from independent reconnaissance near refinery perimeters, though the document provides no names or confirmation of their fate. Some historians suggest the pair might have acted without full authorization, attempting to scout infiltration routes on their own initiative. Others argue the report may refer to resistance allies operating independently. The ambiguity creates a veil of mystery that continues to surround the earliest OSS sabotage debates. What is clear is that the organization struggled to define its role during this period. The U.S. military was built on clear orders and hierarchical command. The OSS operated in shadows where hesitation could be fatal. The friction between these systems forced the agency to confront questions about accountability, autonomy, and the limits of clandestine warfare. These tensions shaped every forbidden mission that followed, influencing decisions across Europe, from France to Norway to the Italian Alps. Reflecting on these events today, one sees a recurring pattern in modern intelligence operations: the balance between opportunity and risk, innovation and oversight. Sabotage, while strategically powerful, carries consequences that extend far beyond a single target. The OSS, still in its infancy in 1943, was learning those lessons in real time, often under intense political scrutiny. As spring gave way to summer, the pressure on the OSS only grew. With Allied commanders demanding coordinated efforts and the Axis fortifying its industrial assets, clandestine operatives felt compelled to prove their worth. It is within this atmosphere of ambition, frustration, and uncertainty that the first disappeared operatives emerged, men whose names rarely appear in official histories, yet whose stories hint at missions that may have proceeded despite explicit orders to halt. And as the Ploiești mystery lingered, a new and even riskier sabotage plan began brewing farther west, deep within occupied France. Its fate would raise even more questions. By the summer of 1943, the Ploiești refinery crisis had already left its mark on the OSS, but it was only the first of several sabotage plans deemed too hazardous for official approval. Still, inside the shaded offices of OSS Station Cairo, a new dossier circulated, one labeled with a terse, handwritten warning, "Operational engagement discouraged. Extreme civilian risk." The target was once again Ploiești, but this time the proposal involved something far more audacious than reconnaissance: a covert infiltration of Romania's refinery workforce using operatives disguised as laborers. The plan, if successful, could have crippled the German oil supply without a single bomber in the sky. The refinery complex was among the most heavily defended industrial sites in occupied Europe. German Sicherheitsdienst units, Romanian Siguranta agents, and Bulgarian auxiliaries maintained overlapping patrols. The OSS, working through Romanian resistance contacts, believed they could insert agents by passing them off as seasonal laborers from the countryside. The operatives would carry small quantities of plastic explosive, enough to destroy control pumps or sabotage pressure valves, using tools that could be concealed within lunch tins or tool rolls. The concept was bold, perhaps even reckless, but its potential impact was undeniable. Yet within hours of the plan reaching the desk of OSS Director William Donovan, Army Air Forces planners raised strong objections. With Operation Tidal Wave's aerial bombing raid imminent, any ground infiltration risked revealing Allied intent and triggering a security lockdown that might compromise the entire air mission. More troubling still, any detonation inside the refinery risked catastrophic fires that could kill hundreds of Romanian civilians working alongside German technicians. For these reasons, the infiltration plan was officially rejected. It became one of the earliest sabotage missions barred by both military and intelligence leadership. Still, something unusual happened in the weeks that followed. A series of internal OSS field irregularities appeared in scattered communications, each hinting at missing personnel or unexplained absence reports. In one memorandum dated July 1943, a liaison officer noted that 2 assets have not returned from assigned contact rendezvous in Constanța. Last message suggests deviation from agreed mission boundaries. The language was cryptic but pointed. While the document avoided naming the individuals, historians have since inferred that the missing men may have been linked to the unauthorized Ploiești reconnaissance. The Romanian resistance also reported strange activity during this period. A surviving diary entry from a resistance organizer referred to 2 Americans who wished to see the oil fields with their own eyes. The note is brief, lacking detail, but it offers a haunting possibility that despite the cancellation, some OSS operatives pressed forward on their own initiative, trusting their training more than the orders they were given. Whether they intended to scout infiltration routes or attempt a partial sabotage remains unknown. German records from the area add another layer of uncertainty. Security logs from August 1943 mention heightened patrol activity due to unidentified foreign presence observed near pipe junction sectors. The entry appears only once and is not referenced again. No arrests are recorded and no firefights are documented. The individuals, if they existed, vanished without trace. The case remains one of the OSS' earliest silent disappearances, never acknowledged in official post-war publications. The tragedy of Tidal Wave itself only deepened the mystery. The bombing mission suffered devastating losses. 53 aircraft failed to return. Amid the chaos and aftermath, any investigation into missing ground operatives was likely overshadowed. The fog of war provided perfect cover for questions to be buried beneath larger tragedies. Even today, historians debate whether the unauthorized infiltration attempt actually occurred or whether its traces represent misinterpreted evidence for more routine resistance activity. This episode also reveals a broader truth about intelligence organizations learning to operate during global conflict. The OSS, still young and eager to prove its capability, attracted men whose boldness sometimes exceeded their instructions. Unconventional warfare demands initiative, but that same initiative can blur the line between sanctioned operations and dangerous improvisation. The Ploiești affair demonstrates how internal communication gaps, rapidly shifting strategies, and secrecy created fertile ground for actions that leadership never intended. Modern intelligence scholars often point to this period as a case study in operational risk. Covert missions demand precise coordination between political objectives and field execution. When those align poorly, the results can be both ineffective and catastrophically costly. The forbidden sabotage attempt at Ploiești illustrates that balance, how one of the most critical oil targets in the Axis empire attracted extraordinary Allied ambition but also extraordinary danger. As Romania tightened security around the refinery following the bombing raid, any remaining hope for a future OSS ground operation evaporated. But for the men who vanished before the airstrike, no final chapter was ever written. Their story lingers as a reminder of how quickly clandestine operations can slip into the void, erased by the shifting tide of war. And while the Ploiești disappearance remains one of the OSS' earliest mysteries, it would not be the last. Far to the west, deep in occupied France, another forbidden sabotage plan was taking shape, one that would involve rail lines, explosives, and a nighttime confrontation that left even fewer answers behind. In the heart of occupied France, the French rail network formed the arteries of the German war machine. By late 1943, the Wehrmacht relied heavily on these lines to transport munitions, armored vehicles, and reinforcements across central France toward the Atlantic Wall and the Italian front. Among these routes, few were as strategically vital as the rail line running near Clermont-Ferrand, a line that, if disrupted, could have choked German logistics for weeks. It was here, in the wooded foothills of the Massif Central, that the OSS drafted one of its most daring yet ultimately forbidden sabotage proposals. The operation, codenamed Signal Break, called for a three-man OSS team to infiltrate the region and collaborate with local Maquis fighters. Their objective was to destroy a stretch of track used to transport munitions to depots in Lyon and Saint-Étienne. The plan relied on precision. Using British-made No. 10 time pencils and 2 pounds of Nobel 808 plastic explosive, the team would place charges at a curved section of track, an optimal point to derail heavy supply trains. But the operation required exact timing. A mistimed explosion risked catching civilian freight rather than military transport. When the proposal reached the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, alarm bells rang immediately. The region around Clermont-Ferrand had become a hotspot of German counterinsurgency operations. After a series of attacks by the Maquis, the Gestapo's local Sicherheitspolizei had increased raids, interrogations, and mass arrests. SOE message traffic to London warned that additional sabotage risked provoking brutal reprisals against villages suspected of aiding resistance fighters. The SOE, already cautious about duplicate Allied operations in the same area, urged the OSS to cancel Signal Break entirely. Officially, Washington agreed. In October 1943, OSS Command issued a stand-down order to the small team awaiting deployment in Algiers. They were instructed instead to focus on reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. But the sit-down order didn't land as intended. Members of the Special Operations Branch were frustrated. They had trained for infiltration, demolition, and irregular warfare, not passive observation. A diary entry from an unnamed OSS explosives instructor stationed in North Africa captures the mood. We teach them to strike hard and vanish. Yet when the moment comes, we tell them to watch from a distance like shadows with their hands tied. What happened next remains one of the OSS' most perplexing early field anomalies. Just weeks after the cancellation, local French resistance groups reported the unexpected arrival of 3 Americans in civilian clothes near the village of Orsins, west of Clermont-Ferrand. Their clothing, mannerisms, and limited French suggested they were newly arrived operatives. The men carried small rucksacks and, according to one witness, equipment they hid from sight. No record exists of an authorized OSS deployment to the region during that period. German documentation from the same time frame adds an unsettling layer. A Sicherheitsdienst report dated November 2, 1943, describes a brief nighttime engagement with unidentified hostile personnel along the rail line north of Royat. The skirmish was short and disorganized, involving only small arms fire. Patrols found traces of explosives near the rail bed, including fragments of British-manufactured detonator casings. No bodies were recovered, Allied or German. The report concludes with a note that remains chilling in hindsight: hostiles likely escaped into the forests. Pursuit unsuccessful. Back in Algiers, communications officers grew concerned when 3 OSS operatives, whose names appear redacted in surviving documents, failed to appear for a scheduled resupply request. Their absence was noted but never formally linked to France. Some internal OSS logs list them as unaccounted for in theater movements, a vague phrase that suggests confusion, perhaps even intentional bureaucratic ambiguity. Whether the men deployed themselves independently or were assisted unofficially by sympathetic officers may never be known. The sabotage attempt, if it indeed occurred, had little tactical effect. The rail line showed no significant damage, and German traffic continued. Yet the incident left fingerprints across Allied and Axis archives. Hints of explosives placed but not detonated, weapons fired in a brief clash, and the silent disappearance of a team that had never been officially sent. Intelligence analysts today view the case as emblematic of the OSS growing pains. The organization attracted men who were bold, highly trained, and deeply committed, but not always aligned with the rigid command structures the U.S. military expected. In the chaos of wartime France, where resistance networks blurred lines and communication delays left ample room for improvisation, unsanctioned operations were not only possible but increasingly likely. This episode also raises broader questions about the ethics and consequences of sabotage in civilian areas. The SOE's warnings about reprisals were tragically grounded in reality. German retaliation throughout the region intensified in late 1943, prompted by both resistance activity and suspected Allied infiltration. Whether the OSS team's actions contributed to this escalation remains uncertain, but the possibility casts a long shadow. By the winter of 1943, the trail of the three missing operatives went cold. Their names, scrubbed from most official logs, survive only in fragments. And while the Clermont-Ferrand rail incident remains unresolved, it became a cautionary tale within the OSS, one that would echo in future debates over covert operations. The lesson came just in time because only months later, an even more perilous and ultimately forbidden operation would surface. This time the target lay in the icy north, where a Kriegsmarine communications hub in Norway drew the attention of operatives willing to risk everything. In the frozen waters of Norway's Trøndelag coast, where the North Sea wind carves across exposed rock and waves crash against fishing villages, the German Kriegsmarine operated one of its most critical communications hubs. By early 1944, the port city of Trondheim held an intricate web of radio relays, U-boat encryption stations, and signal intercept facilities linking Norway's naval forces to Berlin. Its strategic importance made it a tempting target for Allied intelligence. And within the OSS, a plan quietly emerged, one that would become one of the agency's most debated and ultimately forbidden sabotage operations. The proposed mission, later known under the codename Northern Star, was conceived as a joint effort between OSS Special Operations Branch and Norwegian resistance elements of Milorg. The concept hinged on a daring infiltration. A small OSS team, disguised as Norwegian fishermen, would slip into Trondheim Fjord aboard a weather-worn trawler. Under the cover of night, they would land near the Agdenes Peninsula, traverse rugged ground, and plant timed charges at a naval relay station controlling encrypted transmissions to U-boat bases in the Arctic Circle. If successful, the disruption could have severed communications for days, an invaluable advantage at a time when Allied convoys were suffering heavy losses in the North Atlantic. But even the earliest mission drafts hinted at danger. The Gestapo had intensified its presence in Norway after discovering several clandestine SOE supply drops in late 1943. Security along the fjords had tightened, and German patrol boats conducted random inspections of fishing vessels. The region's long winter nights were both a blessing and a curse, covering infiltration, but also exposing operatives to freezing temperatures capable of killing within hours. OSS meteorology reports warned that water temperatures could drop low enough to cause fatal hypothermia in minutes. Still, enthusiasm for the plan grew among a handful of uniquely qualified operatives, men with Arctic experience, demolitions training, and language skills honed at the Farm, the OSS secret training facility near Washington. Yet while the OSS believed the mission was possible, British intelligence saw only disaster. The SOE Norway section had suffered devastating losses in two earlier operations, Operation Freshman in 1942 and Operation Checkmate in 1943, both ending with captured commandos tortured and executed. The British, still reeling from these tragedies, refused to endorse further American involvement in Norway. Their warning to Washington was stark. The German response to sabotage in Norwegian territory remains relentless, punitive, and unforgiving. Casualties among local civilians should be anticipated. This warning gained weight when ultra-intercepts revealed German suspicions of an Allied infiltration attempt somewhere along the Trøndelag coastline. Though the intercepts were vague, their implications were severe. If the Germans were already anticipating sabotage, any small team landing by boat risked immediate discovery. The OSS had been burned before, missions in France and Romania had ended an unexplained loss of personnel. For Donovan's office, political risk now outweighed potential gain. On March 12, 1944, the operation was officially cancelled. The trawler, which had been quietly procured from a Norwegian exile fisherman in Scotland, was ordered to remain docked at Scapa Flow. The demolition charges were boxed, catalogued, and reassigned. On paper, Northern Star died before it began. Yet events that unfolded weeks later suggest that not everyone accepted the cancellation. Norwegian coastal police records, recently declassified, described the discovery of an abandoned fishing trawler drifting near the mouth of the fjord in late April 1944. The vessel bore markings consistent with pre-war Norwegian registry, but its nameplate had been hastily repainted, a common tactic used by Allied clandestine units. No identification was found aboard. The engine still held residual warmth, suggesting it had been vacated within hours. More troubling was the discovery of British-manufactured dry rations and a strip of American-made medical tape tucked inside a storage drawer. Local German units boarded the vessel but found no bodies, no signs of struggle, and no logbook. The boat's dinghy was missing. The Germans wrote off the find as a smuggling operation gone wrong. But for Allied historians, the timing and equipment raise unsettling questions. Did a rogue OSS or mixed Norwegian-American crew attempt the mission despite the stand-down order? So what became of them? Back in London, the OSS maintained official silence. Communications logs contain no acknowledged deployments to Norway in the spring of 1944. Yet a personnel roster lists 3 Norwegian-speaking operatives as status pending awaiting reassignment, a phrase used when individuals were unreachable but not officially declared missing. Their names disappeared from subsequent operational planning documents without explanation. For years, researchers have tried to reconstruct what might have happened. Some suggest the men attempted to land but abandoned the mission after spotting German patrol craft. Others believe they reached shore but were intercepted and quietly executed. Without bodies, prisoner lists, or recovered equipment, the trail ends at the abandoned trawler rocking gently in a cold Norwegian tide. The Northern Star episode highlights a recurring challenge within the OSS during World War II: how to restrain skilled operatives trained for action but ordered to hold back. The tension between discipline and initiative, so present in earlier missions in France and Romania, reached its peak in Norway. Here, in the icy jaws of the North Atlantic, the consequences of a misstep were not merely strategic, they were fatal. And as summer 1944 approached, the OSS's attention shifted southward, where another forbidden mission, this time targeting a dangerous chemical weapons facility in northern Italy, was quietly taking shape. In the rugged valleys of northern Italy, where the Alps rise sharply over narrow villages and winding mountain roads, the German war effort concealed a volatile secret. Just outside Bolzano, occupying forces had repurposed an industrial complex into a sensitive chemical weapons storage and processing site, one that supplied nerve agent precursors and gas canisters to frontline units retreating from central Italy. In early 1944, as the Allies slowly pushed northward through the Apennines, the OSS identified the Bolzano facility as a target of immense strategic value. But unlike previous sabotage ideas, this one carried a deadly weight. Any miscalculation could unleash toxic agents across civilian towns. The OSS proposal, codenamed Project Mercury, grew from intelligence gathered by Italian partisans operating under the Comitato di Liberazione Nazionale. These resistance fighters had risked their lives smuggling reports out of Bolzano, noting increased SS security, restricted traffic, and new ventilation towers erected around a nondescript warehouse complex. Allied chemical warfare analysts in London believed the site contained tabun and mustard gas stockpiles, materials the Germans had stored as a contingency should frontline defenses collapse. Disrupting the supply chain or destroying the facility outright promised enormous strategic benefit. It would cripple German capabilities to deploy chemical agents in Italy. But with benefit came unacceptable danger. OSS demolition experts estimated that even a controlled detonation risked releasing contaminants into the surrounding river basin. Hundreds of civilians lived within 1 kilometer of the suspected storage buildings. Allied command, still reeling from German reprisals in occupied Europe, refused to sanction any operation that threatened civilian lives on such a scale. In April 1944, the operation was formally vetoed by both the OSS and Allied leadership. Yet what the documents say officially does not align with what was discovered later. Italian partisans operating near the facility reported unusual activity the following month. The presence of unfamiliar men near the storage compound, speaking English in hushed tones. According to a partisan courier's handwritten account, dated May 17, 1944, 3 Stranieri moved with military habit, carrying black satchels and studying the guard rotations. He assumed they were British SOE personnel. No SOE mission to Bolzano is recorded for that time frame. Then, in June, Axis security logs reported a brief nighttime engagement near the eastern perimeter of the chemical facility. A German patrol claimed to have exchanged gunfire with unidentified infiltrators who retreated into nearby orchards. No casualties were recovered, but after sweeping the area, German investigators collected remnants of equipment that did not match partisan weaponry: fragments of American-manufactured time pencils, cloth strips from standard OSS medical kits, and a custom demolition harness used in Allied training schools. The Germans tightened security immediately, but they did not report an explosion. Whatever the infiltrators attempted, the charges were either disarmed, removed, or never fully placed. The facility remained intact. Back in Allied territory, the OSS began encountering paperwork irregularities. Equipment shortages, missing rations, and unclaimed demolitions gear logged out from a supply depot in Bari. 3 OSS operatives, whose names were classified post-war and remain partially redacted, were listed as unavailable due to reassignment. No details of that reassignment exist in any surviving dossier. Their personnel files reflect service in Italy through mid-1944, then fade abruptly. Decades later, when historians gained access to additional partisan testimony, a clearer, though incomplete, picture emerged. Several Italian fighters described stumbling upon a small cache of Allied explosives hidden in a rock outcrop near Bolzano. Part of the cache was damaged, as if hurriedly abandoned. Near it, they found blood-stained bandages and torn bits of American cloth equipment. But no bodies. The implications are haunting. It appears that at least one unauthorized Allied sabotage attempt took place, making Project Mercury one of the OSS' most mysterious forbidden operations. Were the operatives acting under quiet approval from a sympathetic officer higher up the chain? Were they driven by their belief that the facility posed a grave future danger? Or were they attempting reconnaissance only, forced to retreat after discovery? Ethically, the case underscores the impossible dilemmas faced by wartime intelligence. A chemical weapons facility presented a clear strategic threat, yet any direct attack risked catastrophic collateral damage. In modern military doctrine, this Italian episode is often cited as an early example of weighing chemical hazard against operational value, a precedent echoed in later Cold War operations involving nuclear and chemical sites. But for the OSS, the greater enigma lies in the disappearance of the unofficial team. No trace of them surfaced in German POW lists. No Allied report confirms their safe return. Their final movements exist only as scattered hints: partisan sightings, shell fragments, medical supplies, and unexplained firefight. As summer deepened and Allied forces pressed further into Italian territory, the mystery of Bolzano was left unresolved. The forbidden operation faded from priority as the war shifted rapidly. Yet the unanswered questions endure: an operation never approved, and yet nearly carried out, leaving behind evidence without explanation. And in the final year of the war, with Germany collapsing, the OSS turned its attention to one last forbidden sabotage plan, this time aimed at a retreating armored convoy in the Alpine passes, where the boundaries between orders and initiative would blur more than ever before. In the final months of World War II, as Germany's forces fractured under relentless Allied pressure, the European front shifted dramatically into the Alpine regions. Retreating Wehrmacht units funneled north toward Austria through a series of narrow, twisting passes, routes that were treacherous in peacetime and perilous during war. These passes became critical escape corridors for German armored and mechanized units attempting to regroup. By early 1945, the OSS identified one such column, a reinforced armored convoy moving through the Brenner Pass. It carried not only retreating troops but key logistics officers and sensitive documents. The destruction of this convoy promised significant strategic value. But it was a mission that Allied command, standing mere weeks from victory, forbade outright. Known informally among a few OSS planners as Operation Alpine Dusk, the proposal involved sabotaging a mountain tunnel north of Vipitino. A small team of OSS operatives would infiltrate the area, set experimental time delay charges along the rock supports inside the tunnel, and collapse the passage as the convoy passed through. The concept drew on newly developed American time detonation technology, micro-delay systems intended for covert mountain demolition. However, these devices were still untested in live combat conditions and carried severe reliability risks. A premature detonation could seal the tunnel before the convoy's arrival. A delayed one could trap civilians fleeing conflict zones. Worse still, a miscalculation might cause a catastrophic collapse that could bury entire villages downstream under rockfalls. By March 1945, the strategic equation had shifted. Germany was collapsing. Eisenhower's headquarters insisted that Allied resources be focused on securing surrender terms and stabilizing liberated regions. The OSS received explicit warning: no unsupported sabotage operations were to be undertaken in the Alpine theater. Allowing untested explosives to be employed so close to the war's close risked unnecessary casualties and political fallout. Alpine dusk was frozen at the planning stage. Still, hints from surviving archival fragments indicate that not everyone accepted the stand-down order. Italian resistance fighters active near the Vipitino corridor reported the arrival of 3 foreign soldiers, in early April 1945, men who spoke accented Italian and carried mountain packs deeper and heavier than those used by partisans. A partisan lookout claimed the trio studied the geometry of the mountain road tunnels and sketched notes against the rock walls. Believing them to be British or American officers surveying post-war reconstruction needs, the partisans paid them little mind. But the timing is too precise to ignore. Their presence aligns almost exactly with the internal OSS schedule for the now-cancelled sabotage mission. German intelligence logs from around the same period mention evaluating recent disturbances along the Brenner tunnels. A sentry station near a secondary tunnel north of Vipitino reported an unexplained echo resembling a small explosive charge detonated deep inside the rock face, too small to cause a collapse, but strong enough to trigger alarm. Inspection teams found scorch marks, remnants of wiring, and a single piece of chemical-fused tubing of American origin. No enemy combatants were captured. No larger device was located. German officers blamed partisans. Partisan leaders denied involvement. Meanwhile, in OSS paperwork trails, odd discrepancies appeared. 3 operatives based in Verona were abruptly removed from personnel rosters between April 5 and April 12. Their files, partially declassified decades later, show only one cryptic notation in the margins: field status undetermined. No assignments, no transfer orders, no casualty records. Their names appear nowhere in subsequent post-war service citations. The most compelling evidence surfaced only long after the war. A veteran of the Italian resistance recalled discovering an abandoned rucksack in a narrow ravine west of the Brenner Pass. Inside were 2 spent American blasting caps, a shattered timing device, and a small blood-stained cloth patch bearing a faded U.S. stencil. He turned the items over to Allied authorities at the time, but no official record of the handover appears in the OSS or U.S. Army archives. The material evidence simply vanished, absorbed into the fog that often swallowed small, unofficial wartime actions. What might have happened inside those Alpine passes? One theory suggests the operatives attempted a scaled-down reconnaissance of the tunnel, planting a test charge to confirm blast patterns. Surprised by German patrols, they may have retreated under fire, abandoning their equipment as they escaped onto partisan terrain. Another theory suggests a premature blast disabled the timer and injured one or more of the team. Without support or extraction options and operating under an order that technically did not exist, they could have vanished into the mountains, their fate unreported to avoid disciplinary repercussions or operational embarrassment. Whatever the truth, Operation Alpine Dusk became the final and perhaps most enigmatic of the OSS forbidden sabotage attempts. Unlike earlier missions in Romania, France, Norway, or Italy, this final operation came at the twilight of the war, a moment when every action, authorized or otherwise, was overshadowed by the overwhelming tide carrying the conflict to its end. In the aftermath of Germany's collapse, Allied investigators focused on documenting war crimes, securing surrenders, and rebuilding shattered regions. The disappearance of a small unofficial sabotage team barely registered amidst the vast machinery of victory. Yet the unanswered questions linger. The scattered evidence, the cryptic file deletions, the strange reports of foreign soldiers in the mountains, all paint the outline of an operation carried out in the shadows at a time when the war itself was fading into dusk. And so this final forbidden mission, like the 4 before it, remains suspended between speculation and history. A covert effort never officially sanctioned, executed in the fog of the Alpine spring, and then absorbed silently into the closing days of the Second World War.